Decentralize all the things. Decentralize all the things.
Hey there! Welcome to the Web3 Summit Decentralize Now podcast series, hosted by the Decentralize All The Things podcast network. This series features discussions about decentralization from the 2018 Web3 Summit held in Berlin, Germany. This is episode 17. In this episode, we listen in on a lively discussion about fully decentralized systems, including plentiful disagreement and critical analysis of the ideas surrounding this highly debated topic. Thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoy the show.
So my name is Jay Rush. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, my name is Jay Rush. I have a project called True Blocks, and I was involved in not very early, but kind of early in late 2015, early 2016. And back then, people were writing smart contracts that were purposefully without an owner, purposefully without a controller. And they were exploring what it meant to build software that no one controlled except for everyone controlling the software. And that was the DAO contract for me for the most part. And at a certain point, people, I think, became a little afraid, and they introduced something called the curators into the DAO smart contract. And to me, that kind of lost the vision of what I thought we were building, which was an uncontrollable, immutable, non-upgradable piece of software that everyone had to agree to prior to joining, and then work within the constraints of that piece of software. Introducing the curators to the DAO changed the dynamic, and it introduced an owner or a controller of that smart contract. And then I thought something got lost. So my goal here is to try to explain what that looks like or what that means or what that is. And then I have a handout that I'm going to give out. It has 20 or 30 different, I call them mantras, where I try to express that feeling that what we could be building is software that can't be controlled. And what happens? What kind of a world do we live in where the software can't be controlled? So hopefully those mantras are somewhat controversial, and I want to try to have a conversation where we possibly argue about these mantras. That my work is all driven by my belief that we can build software that can't be controlled, and what does it look like, and how does that behave? So I'm going to show a short video where I kind of try to get to exactly the point that I believe blockchains, for the first time, allow us to reach what John Nash would call an equilibrium that's a different thing than the regular operation of human beings in a group. And we can behave in a group in a way that's different. And I think blockchains allow us to try to reach to that goal. And then I want to talk about that for a tenth of a second. Then I'll hand out these handouts and we can argue. Okay? So hopefully we'll be able to hear this.
Nash, you might want to stop shuffling your papers for 5 seconds.
I will not buy you gentlemen beer.
Oh, we're not here for beer, my friend.
Oh. Does anyone else feel she should be moving in slow motion?
Will she want a large wedding, you think? Should we say swords, gentlemen? Pistols at dawn?
Have you remembered nothing? Recall the lessons of Adam Smith, the father of modern economics.
In competition, individual ambition serves the common good.
Exactly.
Every man for himself, gentlemen. And those who strike out are stuck with their friends.
I'm not going to strike out.
This guy here is John Nash. He's the founder of an idea called game theory, basically. I think back in the late 50s. And this is supposed to be the moment when he realizes what that means, what it means to for people to reach the best solution to certain problems. They have to act in their own best interests and the best interests of the group at exactly the same time. And that, I think, is what you can do with smart contracts if they're well written. So that's why I wanted to show you this. But there's also a comment. As soon as he has his realization, there's a comment by another guy that I want you to pay attention to as well. And this drives my work, the comment that this guy makes. So let's try to, I just wanted to interrupt for a second.
You can lead a blonde to water, but you can't make her drink.
I don't think he said that.
All right, nobody move. She's looking over there. Right, she's looking at Nash.
Oh, God. All right, he may have the upper hand now, but wait until he opens his mouth. Remember the last time?
Oh, yes, that was most of the history books. Adam Smith needs revision.
What are you talking about?
If we all go for the blonde, we block each other. Not a single one of us is going to get her. So then we go for her friends. But they will all give us the cold shoulder because nobody likes to be second choice. But what if no one goes for the blonde? We don't get in each other's way, and we don't insult the other girls. That's the only way we win. That's the only way we all get laid. Adam Smith said, the best result comes from everyone in the group doing what's best for himself, right? That's what he said. That's right. Incomplete. Incomplete. Okay? Because the best result would come from everyone in the group doing what's best for himself and the group.
Ash, this is some way for you to get the blonde on your own. You can go to hell.
Governing dynamics, gentlemen. Governing dynamics. Adam Smith. Who's wrong?
So he says Adam Smith was wrong. So for 300 years, we believed that a marketplace, which is what Adam Smith talked about, naturally materializes in the best outcome for the entire population. That's what Adam Smith said. And John Nash concludes that that's not complete. It's incomplete. There's more to it, that we can do even better than that by also cooperating at the same time. As soon as he has that realization and makes that comment, this other guy says, he basically says, are you trying to cheat? Are you trying to take advantage? Are you trying to get me to go along with your vision so that you can take advantage of the situation? And this is exactly the reason why human beings pull back away from a suggestion that we should work together, because we're worried that someone else can take advantage. Because we see in the system that we could take advantage, and we know that if we can take advantage, another person can take advantage. And then we have to trust that other person. So blockchains let us write software that removes entirely the need to trust the other side of the deal. If you've written the software well, and you don't put something like an owner into the software, because an owner can do special things. So this is my driving influence. This is what I'm trying to enable, trying to make more obvious to people, trying to help people come to the realization that we can do this. And for me, that means everybody has to have equal access to all the data that's available all the time. So that's what True Blocks is basically about, is running your own node and getting the data directly for yourself. It's kind of a pipe dream. It's kind of a ridiculous situation because it's really, really hard. But that's where I'm coming from. So let me hand out now what I call mantras for decentralized data. This is a list of about 30 things that I've been thinking about for the last 2 years that just try to push buttons a little bit so that people start thinking about this kind of issue. And then we can have that conversation about that, about this issue, about trust, about what are we building, why are we building it, and so forth. So can someone join me on this side of the thing so I don't feel like I'm all alone over here?
Yeah, no problem. Should we just each read one of these or something?
So I went to this discussion by this guy that's a world expert on how to get groups to talk, and he told me that the best way to get groups to talk is to give them something to read for 3 minutes before the talk, so that everybody has the same sort of ideas in their head for the talk. So just go ahead and spend the next 2 or 3 minutes reading, and I will put it up on the screen so we can show it to the web, and then we'll have our conversation. I'm not necessarily convinced that I believe every one of these things, but I say them just to, it's kind of the way I think. And it always comes back to this idea that I want to try to make the data accessible enough so that people can get over the hump of not trusting each other. That's kind of what I would be with the basic idea of what I'm trying to do. So does anyone react positively or negatively to any of these statements? Or?
Yeah, so I think the point I'm trying to make is sort of embedded or can be applicable to different. So it's in general about the openness of data. So I agree with most of the statements that I see here in the sense that, for example, where was it that you should be able to sort of start serving the immutable data. I don't know exactly which point it was, trying to make it easier to get the data or something. Yeah, so anyway, so it doesn't really matter because like what I'm about to say applies to everything or a lot of these things. It's about if you look at licensing for data, so you see a lot of like companies licensing, having other people to pay to get access to data, which is like the inverse of what's being stated here. Is sometimes funny because if someone purchases a license from someone else to obtain some data, they actually receive a digital copy of that data. So it's not like I'm handing over something like a token, which cannot be like double spent. Like the data is just copied. But the fact of the matter is that people don't, or companies in general don't want to use this type of systems like IPFS, like content addressable systems, just because it would allow people to like maintain that copy forever. So by handing out a license and revoking that license again, it's a silly concept, but it switches, like it gets some sort of a switch in the user's mind or the purchaser of that license, that once he loses that license, he also mentally loses access to the data, while physically he still has that data because he still owns a copy. And so I think that's an interesting aspect of how people look at let's say the availability of data. It's not because the data physically or like technically is available that you also have at all times the perception that the data is actually accessible, because you don't feel entitled anymore that you can still access the data because like your license is expired to that data sort of. Yeah, I mean, maybe it's a silly thing, but it applies in how you implement the distribution of immutable data, I think. So if you use these systems, it's very difficult, or it becomes very difficult for people to actually use licensing schemes anymore. So like I'm a proponent for this thing, of course. But that was just like one of the things reading through it, like jumped to my mind that this is something that a lot of people who are like trying to monetize access to data just don't want to see, right?
I totally agree with you that, and for me, immutable data, especially immutable data that's been agreed to on a public network like Ethereum or any of the public blockchains, has already been owned or created by the entire community. The whole community is creating this data, and we're paying for it, I think, through if I'm a holder of a coin in a blockchain, the block reward that happens at every block is effectively lowering my value of that coin. That's inflation of the coin. And I think of that as me paying for the creation of the data that we're securing with that blockchain. So why am I going to have to pay for it again? And that's kind of where I come from, that we've already paid for it. We all own it already. And everybody should be able to get it freely, because I want us all to build applications in John Nash's world, not in a world where we don't trust each other. That's where I'm coming from. Did anyone else have any other things that struck them or they found?
Yeah, I have one that for me it's, I think, yeah, of course. There is one that says, let me see. Software solutions are either fully decentralized from the start or never will be. I'm just absolutely against that sentence, at least at the stage that we are right now. So security And here we come again to the security issues. And I think that the DAO is a good example on that. For me, I think decentralization is a path. First, I don't understand decentralization as a binary thing. It's something that it is or is not. Decentralization is a gradient. It's like a path. It's like the freedom. Freedom is not you are free or you are not. You are more free or you are less free. So decentralization is a little bit the same. The concept is like you go through decentralization. You go to the path to decentralization. And in general, you can talk about, but systems that are more progressive, that goes in the one direction, I believe that they have more chances to succeed and to become than not changes that needs to just break everything and change on the stuff. Here, for example, in the DAO is we think so. For example, having systems that are quite centralized at the beginning, while they are securing and getting more secure, just testing that the system works, and then having a path to being every time more decentralized. I think it's possible. Of course, it's an opinion, okay? But I think it's possible, and I think it's a better path and a more optimal path than Ethereum by itself. Ethereum, for example, has a lot of criticism that's centralized. I think that we fully agree that if we compare the decentralization of Ethereum at Bitcoin, it's much more decentralized Bitcoin than Ethereum at this stage. But at this point, I see, or at least until now, Ethereum have also evolved. We have tested a lot of technologies that we can advance more. So we tested a lot of things and we improve it. We research it. We get a better technology in this path. You need to. That doesn't mean that at some point so the end goal you don't need to lose what's the end goal, and you need to define and very clearly define that you are going to be decentralized, and you have to put the mechanism in the governance, in the smart contracts, just at the start to this path. But in the early stages, I think is a better strategy. I'm talking about the strategy to start in a more centralized matter, especially in a stage where we don't even know, that we don't have even knowledge on that.
So I'll just read another one of these mantras. It says, so that one was about, I said, software solutions are either fully decentralized from the start or they never will be. And there's another one here that says, this is another one. The path from centralization to decentralization is not a slider. It's an on-off switch. So those two things kind of go together. Jordi is on a different side. I'm not even sure I'm on my side, to be perfectly honest. In a practical world, I think that it's probably true that you have to go through this centralization place. I think it's I think it's really interesting to go all the way to decentralization on purpose from the beginning, so that you can explore what it looks like out there, and then you can come back and help people get down that path. So let's stay on that subject for a little while. Does anyone else have any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, the whole point of this node, in my opinion, or at least how it was designed, was to point out how ever decentralized we think we are, the infrastructure that we're working with is completely so you go ahead and build a decentralized piece of code, but then have some giant telco cut your access to the internet, right? And so, wow, it was super uncensorable, right? Oh wait, no, unless you're in Spain and Telefonica doesn't like what you're doing, or the government doesn't like what you're doing. Or you're using someone else's server. You don't have a server in your house. You don't control your data. No matter what you're doing right now in the world that we have today, you can't be fully decentralized. And obviously, Jordi and I have played these games with pushing the limits of decentralization, and it's exploded in our face. And so and maybe me more than him. I think it's been mentioned a couple of times. There was this DAO thing, but if we start off with a path built in, if there is we worked on this awesome product called the Vault, which right now is the Giveth Bridge, which has a security guard, an owner, a time delay, right? It has all these security features. We even added recently a dead man switch, so that this awesome guy Bowen every day has to push a button, otherwise money can't come out, right? But that can be automated away. We built in, when designing these centralization features, there's for security, we built in a way for them to be removed. The design is that eventually, once we trust the rest of the code base, we can decentralize the holding of the funds. But right now, I don't even know if we fully trust the Solidity compiler. We're in such early stages that it's sort of reckless to go full decentralization. And the only reason people do it is because they're worried about legal shit, right? They want to avoid a lot of the laws that would say, oh, you're stewarding these funds, and that means that you need to apply for licenses, or SEC will put you in jail.
So I mentioned the DAO as a glorious example of code, not to bring up anything negative, but I understand completely what you're saying, and we live in a practical world. So I unfortunately, maybe I live in a world 25, 30 years from now where we are all running our own nodes and we're all extracting the data directly for ourselves, and the telephone systems can't censor us and so forth. So I like living out there just to think about these things in this way, and I totally understand there's practical problems with it.
No, I couldn't agree more. And Jordi even qualified his statement with that exact thing. For now, right now, we can't do full decentralization. Even though this node is called Decentralized now, it's it's almost like one of these phrases. It's really just to bring up the point. Let's be aware, where we really are.
My name is Stefan, by the way. Yeah. So I just wanted to point out also the fact that, I think all of us sitting here, we've been thinking about decentralization and all these concepts and the potential risks of centralization and all that. But I think we must not forget that for people who haven't been in that thought process all that much, it takes some time to sort of wrap your head around a lot of these concepts. And in that sense, I think it's a far stretch to expect from anybody who hasn't spent a lot of time thinking about all these concepts to immediately get on that train and then say okay, let's go full decentralization, because it's not only a practical thing, just a lot of infrastructure still needs to be built and so forth. A lot of software needs to be improved, but also the minds of people need to change, and that also will take a lot of time. So in that sense, I would also argue that the decentralization part is more like a slider thing. It's a gradual thing where people also have to sort of be given the time to wrap their head around it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I agree with. I'm thinking more in the context of data, right? Which I think is the data, and definitely I am of the opinion that decentralization is more like a trend or like a path, a philosophy to follow, than kind of an objective that can be achievable. That's the way I see it always, and we have to be pragmatic. In regards to what is data and knowledge, the fact is that as we are not prepared, or we are not culturally, to this decentralization of knowledge and information. And in fact, it's something that already started when it started in the 80s or in the 70s even. There were some philosophers, you might have heard of Ortega. Some of the disciples were studying what would be the impact of electronics. They would say computers, because there were no computers. So what is the impact of electronics? And they were very concerned with the fact that there will be centralization or more centralization of knowledge and information as a result. And that we will normally blindly accept that rather than questioning that. So we are really against a trend that is beyond our own efforts of each of us. Have to be aware of the risk of centralization of content and knowledge, and it's something that has only just started, and we see how massive it is. So I invite you to read those things for the Disciples of Ortega Gasset, talking about information and the risks of electronics, because it was really, really focused on what will happen with this, is that there will be a trend to centralization of knowledge and information, that we should fight to maintain our own freedom. That was at the stake as a result of that.
I completely agree, and I was involved not heavily, but in the early internet, back when the internet first came out. And one of the very early things that people were talking about when servers, internet, web servers came out, was that everyone can run a web server and serve their own content to every other person. And that didn't happen because the software requirements were heavier than the hardware capabilities. So the software moved to these gigantic servers, and we have this hugely centralized world now. And my concern, if we're not careful, is we're creating exactly the same dynamic, so that 35, 40 years from now, the only people that can extract the data from these unbelievably complicated blockchains is going to be big, giant companies with hundreds of employees churning on the data constantly. And I see that as a worse outcome than just staying with Web 2.0, or let's go back to Web 1.0, if we're going to just centralize worse than we ever did before. And that's part of my concern as well.
Yeah, the one that kind of struck me that I just wanted to read again was scaling up from decentralized to centralized is easier than scaling down from centralized to decentralized. And it just makes me think about, how our team at DAppNode has kind of been like navigating these waters, how we're gonna keep working together, and how we can effectively communicate the strategy that we're working on for the most effective way for us to stay aligned. And it's from a communication standpoint, from a trust standpoint, being decentralized is super hard. So it makes you think about how when you have a decentralized team of people who are really truly decentralized and they're contributing code in a way that's fluid and natural and that aligns, they don't really need to create this rigid structure, right? It's fluid. But then if you're looking at this and you're saying, okay, we're scaling up to centralized, so we're taking it to the next level, we're gonna like go after the next big thing. It's almost like stepping back into a place where actually what you're doing is it's like it's hard to explain. Yeah, it's hard to explain. So that thing really struck me, and it made me think about how how we can work better together is really about stepping back and staying in communication, staying in touch, and making sure that we're always aligned with what we're building and the direction that we're going.
Yeah, I think to stay decentralized as a team, you really something we didn't do very well in Giveth, in my opinion, actually, is building value statements. And how do you stay aligned if you don't define what you're doing and how the values and the way that you're going to do it? It takes a lot of work to build in decentralization into your community. It's so easy. All the tools are built around centralizing, right? Like even GitHub was down a couple days ago, right? That's the main thing we use to be decentralized. Everything is on GitHub, and Microsoft owns it, and it goes down for 6 hours. Like, it's crazy. And if you have a GitHub, who merges pull requests? It's definitely not a DAO, okay? There's no DAOs merging pull requests. We're working on it. There's a group called Pando. Really cool. But it's centralized.
Just a couple of words on decentralized teams. Just by itself, building a team is challenging by itself, even if the team is absolutely centralized. This is very, very, very challenging. It's not easy, and a lot of the times at least fails. So that's a fair thing. That building a team that's decentralized, it's like double challenging at least. So that's something that we need to be aware. We don't know, and of course we need to learn a lot in how to work in decentralized teams. One of the things that I've seen, and I think that the people confuses in decentralization, when we talk about decentralization, means mainly that sometimes it's the lack of centralization or it's the lack of power. But it's not the lack of power. That means that the power is in the peers, is in the people in the same manner. And power, I would say, is almost a synonym of responsibility. Okay, that means that the same way that the central power without responsibility doesn't work, if we transfer this power to the peers, and these peers have not the responsibility, it's not going to work neither. Okay, so I think that's important that we are aware that when we are in a decentralized team, we, all of us, have the power, means have the responsibility for the team to work on. And the other thing that I think that also confuses a lot is the decentralization in none of the case means the lack of leadership. Sometimes people think that decentralization is, okay, everybody do whatever they want, and then it will work just by magic art, and well, sometimes there is magic, and sometimes maybe something works, but in general, it doesn't work. Okay, so the leadership is one role, like many other roles that in a team somebody needs to play on. And the facilitator, there are many roles in a normal team theory that they needs to be there. If they are not there, the team will not work, and that happens in centralized and decentralized team. So that's for me the at least some views on that.
Yeah, so I really appreciate what you say about there's going to be a leader, decentralized or not, there's going to be a leader. And the issue is power. And the issue is, what type of power does that leader have? Does that leader have power that has been agreed to? And I'm talking now about, in specific, a smart contract, that the power that the leader has been agreed to beforehand by all the participants. And can the participants conclude that the power that the leader is using, he's using in a way that they've previously agreed to? So one of the things I say here is owner is a mistake. So I say that because a lot of people just put is owner in the smart contract, and what that means is that the owner can do pretty much anything they want, sort of including upgrading the software to brand new version of the software, which to me completely eliminates the control on the power that leader has, so that the community, I think, doesn't really form to the extent that it could form if the power was very specifically controlled in that smart contract. So I agree with you completely that all of these things are difficult and very impossible, but we should be careful and thoughtful about just adding the ability to upgrade a smart contract, because to me that doesn't really live in the world that I want to live in, which is John Nash's world, instead of that guy that doesn't trust anybody.
Let me disagree a little bit with you. It's but the world is about evolution, okay, and adapting to new circumstances and adapting to the future. So I would just say the opposite that says. So any organization that has not the ability of upgrading itself is a dead organization, especially if you are in crypto or in technology in those days. But that's so I think, and I know where you are going. So it's no, I know that you are meaning. Other thing, and I think is where you are going is how, because this is where most of the tricks are in the governance, and we are going to the governance of a decentralized manner, is how this upgradability should be done. Okay, and then we go to exactly the same point, is how the decisions should be made in a decentralized manner, or if you want, what's the governance of a decentralized structure should be. But if we accept that we have a decentralized governance, as part of the governance, upgrading or having some levels of upgrading, I think that's a must. I would not understand. So for me, it's difficult to think in any organization, at least any human organization, that does not have a form of improvement, of upgradability, even in their own rules or in their own governance. That would mean that you don't accept that you can be wrong, even that.
As far as my mantras compared to the audience, I think I'm about not 0 for 9 so far. So does anyone have? Oh, one. Oh, okay.
I have to disagree with you. Really, again, I really think that there is something that businesses need to evolve, and that there are things that is called a business logic, that is the own business of the own logic of a business, that is the one by the means that an organization can survive and needs to be adaptive and needs to evolve. And therefore, it shouldn't be put in a smart contract and in Ethereum. That's my point. So what I think, as far as we don't have yet a culture of values that are pretty much aligned, where we say an escrow contract is this kind of contract, and because we all agree we don't need to create another escrow contract, when we'll start having those building blocks that we can play for build the business logic of an organization, we need to continue experimenting with this. But those basic layers of values that can be implemented in code, as soon as they become values that are generally acceptable, they have a place in the blockchain. So what I mean when I see things like what I'm seeing, like all these proxy contracts to be able to access something that you can change, really bangs my mind. It's like, okay, sorry, this was not supposed to be like that. Still, it's very interesting. It is very interesting, but I'm still, in favor of something more like these libraries that will do the mathematics, and everybody agrees that 1 + 1 is 2, and if it is 256 + 1 is 1. These kind of things that we agree and that we have it as values. And as soon as nobody understands that 256 + 1 is 1, then we shouldn't use that operator. Then we need to have this thing that translates something that is miserably failing in the design to match with what we understand ourselves as values. Therefore, so I think that these things still need to be settled at the grounds. Play with it, but recognizing that it's not the end state. So it's we are still learning, and it's still pretty much an experiment, and will make us understand better what this is good for. But so far, its owner is a mistake.
Yeah, or at least, and this is, I think I also agree. So at least when you see its owner in a contract, at least all alarms should raise it, at least. So that's the alarms should trigger.
So there's different kinds of is owner. There's is owner who can simply just change everything. There's is owner who's restricted by governance. Is what we're. Let me touch on something that's near and dear to my heart. I say break out of the browser, but stay behind the node. There's a big, wide desktop out there. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Do we have to write everything we do inside of a browser forever? Or can we go back to developing desktop software that interacts directly with the node and just presents a native interface on a desktop? Is that even close to reasonable? You're not allowed to talk. No, I'm sorry. It's
like, I just wanted to do a joke. It's like, I think that we just forget that. We should forget the. It's just a joke, but we just forget to writing desktop applications, and we just write assembly machine without operating system applications.
That would suit me perfectly. I would love to write command line interface is what I'm talking about. So does anyone else? I grew up in a day prior to the browser even existing. So a desktop application is wonderful for me, but I think a lot of people, they grew up in a browser and they can't even imagine an application that's not inside of a browser. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
I think you're seeing a huge movement towards that actually in the Ethereum space. My crypto, and even Ledger, actually Ledger is the other way, right? They moved back into the browser. And so but for the most part, if you want native security, people don't trust the browser very much anymore. And it's a scary place to work when you're dealing with a wallet, especially. And so I think it makes a lot of sense, but it's something. Another piece, though, is that the user experience in the browser is just so much better. The user's already there. It's smooth. They just go right in. Having that extra leap of downloading this onto your computer, which is a little scary as well, is really hard. So there's this other side of it where the user experience is so important that sometimes you make these compromises.
The middle ground is this new progressive web apps that, you have a web app, but then on your phone they act natively. So I would imagine that would come to the desktop as well, if I'm not mistaken. The fact that I could have a...
What are the examples of that?
So, for example, if you go to twitter.com on your mobile, certain Androids recognize that you can make that as a shortcut to the desktop, and then it acts like a native app, but it is a progressive web app. And so you have companies like the Microsoft Store and the Android Store who just scan websites for progressive web apps and add them to the App Store, and they behave like native apps, but they are inherently web apps.
Well, one of the things that I look at, the reason why I might want to be on a desktop application is because, for example, if I want to communicate without letting anyone know that I've communicated, I can encrypt the entire communication prior to injecting it into the node. And then my friend on the other side of the world can extract that and decrypt it outside of the node so that I have a private communication with my friend. That, to me, if I'm in the browser, it feels a little more difficult, but I don't know enough about a browser, so we'll just say that. Did anyone else have any other things to say?
Yeah, so in my opinion, or to my observation, I think there are two different reasons for either going to the browser and returning back from the browser to more like desktop apps or even hardware stuff. Is just where all the tools are, right? So if you want to build a rich user experience, for example, it's better to go to a higher level language and to a place where there are you just can compose, mix and compose whatever's available in the open source space mostly. So if I wanna build a rich user interface, I'll naturally go towards a browser because all the ready-made tools are there. It's very easy to do that. And on the other hand, you have the requirement of security, where because it's so open and at such a high level of on the language level, there's so many levels that's where it can go wrong security-wise. So I mean that's the tendency to go back down to the hardware sort of. So I just think it depends on the use case that you're trying. What problem are you trying to solve? And to wrap up that thought for me is that I think it's just not feasible to go too low level again if you want to build a rich user interface, because the technology is evolving so fast that by the time you can push out that desktop software, probably the underlying technology is also already obsolete.
So actually that thought has to wrap up this session. Thank you so much, Jay. That was really good. Let's have a...
Thanks for listening. If you haven't already, please subscribe and give us a rating or comment if you enjoyed this content. This episode was brought to you by Santa and the unicorns at giveth.io. Remember, this podcast is made possible by the donations we receive from listeners like you. If you'd like to help support the podcast, you can do so by donating Ether at dattpodcast.com. That's DATT podcast.com. Please check the show notes for more information. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, keep decentralizing all the things.
Decentralize.